Good afternoon and welcome to our regular council meeting for Monday, April 22nd, 2024. I will call the meeting to order at 5 p.m. First item on the agenda, under agenda item 1.1, Land Acknowledgement. The town of Coaldale acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot peoples of the Canadian Plains and pays respect to the Blackfoot peoples past, present, and future, while recognizing their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationship to the land. The town of Coaldale is also home to Métis District Number 1 of Foothills. Agenda item 1.2, Conflict of Interest Declaration, Pecuniary and Non-pecuniary. Are there any in the room this afternoon? None declared, thank you. Moving on to agenda item 2.1, acceptance of the agenda for April 22nd, 2024. Are there any additions or omissions? See none, could I get someone to make a motion that council adopt the regular council meeting minutes or agenda for April 22nd, 2024 as presented? Councillor Pickering. Any further discussion? See none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously, thank you. Moving on to agenda item 3.1, adoption of the previous minutes for the regular council meeting of April the 2nd, 2024. Were there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, could I get someone to make a motion that council adopt the regular council meeting minutes from April 2nd, 2024 as presented? Councillor Reese. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously, thank you. Agenda item 3.2, Committee of the Whole meeting minutes from April the 8th, 2024. Were there any errors or omissions in those minutes? Seeing none, could I get someone to make a motion to adopt the Committee of the Whole meeting minutes from April the 8th, 2024 as presented? Deputy Mayor Saylor. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 4.1 under delegation by appointment. We are having our 2023 audited financial statements presented, and we have our Chief Financial Officer and Deputy CAO Kyle Beauchamp presenting, along with Nadine Granson from Avail Chartered Professional Accountants. Welcome, Nadine. So whenever the two of you are ready, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks and good evening, Council. So as you alluded to, Mr. Mayor, we have the 2023 audited financial statements for you. With me is Nadine Granson from Avail. So the financial statements, I know, can sometimes be a little dry, not the most interesting thing. So you see through the presentation here, what we try and do is keep things a little light, encourage questions. If there's something that comes up that you're not sure of or you're unaware, there is no silly questions. Please feel free to answer them. And then starting that, I'm just going to make a little analogy here for the financial statement. So go back to December 2022, council set the budget. And what that budget essentially does is it sets the Christmas list for the town for the whole year of what we're going to try to accomplish and purchase and spend our money on. So with that being said, today is like Christmas morning. We get to open up our presents, open up the financial statement, and see all the goodies inside. So starting in the presentation here, so I'm going to first outline the roles here. So we have three parties involved. So we have management, which be myself in this instance, responsible for the preparation and accuracy of the financial statements. We have yourself as council. You're responsible to review and approve the financial statements. So again, if anything comes up, you have questions, please feel free to bring those up. And then we do have Avail CPA here, who is responsible for auditing the financial statements. So auditing the financial statements essentially means they're giving an opinion if the financial statements are correct within material respects. So I will try not to look like this character after I'm done. But again, if any questions do come up, please interrupt me as they do start. First, we're going to start off with our overview of our balance sheet. So the balance sheet is what our assets and liabilities are as of a certain point in time, and this being December 31st. So what we do have here is our financial assets at the top, followed by our financial liabilities and our non-financial assets. So we do have 2023 here in the left and 2022 comparison on the right. So anything that's a financial asset is essentially cash or something that can be turned into cash, liquidated within a year's time. Financial liabilities are our total debt, followed by our non-financial assets, which are our capital assets. So, we're building the recreation center, or if we purchase, a new truck or a piece of equipment, that's an asset that's expected to be used over a longer period of time. So it goes into the bottom there. So we see that total financial assets are $21.5 million. This is down from $29.5 the year before, while our financial liabilities remain relatively consistent at $32.1 million and $33 million the year before. So the large reason why our financial assets have decreased is the construction that we've been incurring on the recreation center. So we've had $9 to $10 million worth of cash come out the door to fund that capital asset. So everything approximately else being even, that's the large reason for that. As we go down here to the next page, I'm going to talk about the statement of operations and accumulated surplus. So this is essentially our income statement for the year. What did we budget, what did we make, and what was our income at the end of the year? So I'll go through these in the next slide here, but total revenues for the year were $22 million over the budget of $20.46 million, so approximately $1.5 million higher than budget. Our expenses were at $21.6 million, slightly under budget at $21.7 million. So these two figures I gave here are essentially everything we use to operate the town throughout the year. They not include any capital transactions. So before, at the budget, we were projecting a deficit of $1.2 million. This is a deficit because we are including amortization in this. And our actual results was a surplus of $400,000. So we're about $1.6 million ahead there. At the end of the year, or after considering our capital transactions, our accumulated surplus was $2.975 million compared to our budget of $1.24 million. So breaking these down in a little further detail. Property taxes here, we had a surplus of $30,000 due to our supplemental taxes being higher than budgeted. User fees and revenues, surplus of $242,000. $120,000 of that was from utility revenues being higher due to higher water consumption, and $100,000 from our emergency services going to the wildfire calls in the year. Operating grants, $285,000 higher. $65,000 of this was from the MSI operating grant doubling in the year, which was unexpected at the time of budget. An additional $160,000 for the Stormwater Master Plan and $20,000 for the library grants. Should be noted that the $120,000 from the Stormwater Master Plan, this additional revenue is offset through higher expenses as well. Land development, we did have one lot sell in the year, and we do have one lot remaining that is likely to be sold until 2025. So that's an estimate there. Not really any change, just a timing of cash flow there. And our franchise fee revenue was $140,000 higher in the year. This wasn't necessarily due to the franchise fees, but we did receive a construction rebate from Fortis of $130,000. So this would be a non-recurring item that doesn't happen every year. And on the next page here, investment income was $50,000 higher, Fines, penalties for the radar was $116,000 higher in the year. Permits and fees was modest at $25,000 ahead of budget. And while the big one being our other revenue was $1 million higher than budget. So $180,000 of this was to donations received from the Recreation Center Coaldale Strong campaign. We don't budget for that as an operational expense. And then the balance is remaining gain on sale of tangible capital assets that we sold in the year. So we sold some assets, largely being the old town office, and the profit from that gets pushed into this account. Five-year trend analysis of our operating revenues. Seeing 2019, $17.3 million, up to this year, 2023, of $22 million. And finally, moving on to the expenses here. General government includes council, legislation, administration, budget surplus of 1.27%, or $25,000. Protective services, budget surplus of $52,000. Police and emergency management were $30,000 under, plus bylaw $30,000 under, and a slight overage on the fire department side. Transportation services, so any of this includes our roads, public works essentially. We were $110,000 over budget, but this was due to the 8th Street crossing upgrades at CP Rail requested us during the year of $125,000. Finally, on this page, planning, development, and engineering was $161,000 under budget, but this is largely due to projects that were planned to occur in the year that did not. So $100,000 for the link pathway, and the servicing at the northeast industrial lots, those total $250,000, which we do expect those to occur in 2024. Finally, recreation and culture, 2% under budget. The large part of this was not having the in-town school bus program anymore. That saved us $52,000 on the expense side. And finally, our environmental services, which consists of our utilities, was $140,000 over budget. The lion's share of this being cost for the new sewage lagoon, which was approximately $150,000 extra to operate in the year. Another 5-year trend analysis here. You can see as our revenues did increase, our operating expenses are following a similar pattern at $17.2 million in 2019, up to $21.6 million in 2023. The next page is probably of the most interest to council. We're going to go through the capital assets. So these are all the projects that you approved in our capital budget, detailing the actual cost in the year and whether or not they were under or over budget. So first, we'll start with this trend analysis. This shows the total amount we've invested in the capital over the last 5 years. So $10 million in 2019, up to $16.6 million this year. I don't have any comparable stats here of other municipalities, but I would like to say that our investment in capital assets, investing in the community, is higher on a per capita basis than our comparable municipalities, which is good in the sense that we're further investing and maintaining the infrastructure in our town. So what we've compiled now is a listing of all the capital projects that occurred in the year, everything costing over $50,000 as a material threshold. The biggest one being the Recreation Center. So it has a total budget of $18.88 million, with the total costs incurred of just under $10 million in the year. So at the end of the year, a total of $16.6 million has been spent to that project, leaving $2.3 million for the rest of the year. I won't go through all of these projects in detail, but you can see which ones are completed, which ones are still ongoing. Ongoing being the Civic Square addition and renovations, some Northwest Coaldale infrastructure. The lagoon upgrade, we expect final cost to be completed in 2024. along with the Civic Square outdoor space, pool renovations, and the potable water reservoir, which had just started design this last year. Okay, so there's a lot of figures, a lot of number there. Break it down. We had a surplus of $2.975 million in the year, but part of that we allocate to capital assets. We allocate to future reserves and in future savings. So once we factor those numbers out, the surplus that we're left is $613,698. So we've allocated that surplus on the screen here, as you see, based on previous commitments made by council, either through budget or discussions of other items. So $115,000 allocated to the fire department and facility upgrades, $100,000 allocated to the replacement of the town's ERP system, $100,000 for interest revenue and cash flow management in 2024. The library's operating surplus gets to stay with the library board at $28,000. Facility operating surplus committed to the pool capital upgrades. We did have a small net utility deficit of $34,000. And the remaining one of $275,000. We talked before in August about the Civic Square outdoor space, in which we did have approximately $500,000 unfunded, which would have to be funded through debenture debt and a tax increase. What we've done here is allocated the remaining surplus to that project to reduce that unfunded liability. That was kind of the direction we took from council in August or September when that project was discussed. So final couple points here before I turn it over to Avail. Our restricted reserves at the end of the year. So the funds that we have for future capital projects, if you can see that very well. $13.5 million. This is down from $22.5 million at the beginning of the year, largely due to the funds spent on the recreation center as planned. Total debt at the end of the year, debenture debt. We did repay approximately $1 million in the year, but we did acquire $1 million of new debt at the end of the year. So we're sitting at $17.6 million of debt at December 31st, 2023. That is approximately 53% of our debt limit, down from 58% the year before. So that's the end of the financial statement presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Nadine to talk about the audit report and some other fun stuff. So, do you want to do the audit report first?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I can do that.
Perfect. All right. So thank you for inviting me to help Kyle present today. So I'll be going through the auditor's report, the management letter, and the post-audit letter as well. So we spent a couple of weeks bugging Kyle, Tim, Ashley, and the team here. And we present you with a 2-page report based on that. So we do a lot of work behind it to get this report, but this is your audit report for the 2023 year end. We do provide our opinion at the top, and the opinion is a clean audit opinion. As Kyle discussed earlier, we found nothing that was materially misstated in the statements and nothing of concern to us. Oh dear.
Oops. Can you move that picture? I can't see the bottom.
Sorry. Okay. We do want to point out the emphasis of matter point there. We did do some adjustments and prior period adjustments to the financial statements based on what's known as asset retirement obligations. All municipalities had to do this. If they chose not to do it, they received either a denial of opinion or basically it was the denial of opinion. What it was is PSAB, which governs us, public sector accounting body that governs us, decided that if we were having to retire assets in the future, we needed to set up a current year liability for that. So that would include asbestos in buildings. It would include, I think it was the lagoons that we had. So anything that the town of Coaldale is responsible to putting back to its original and fixing everything and making sure everything's done, they wanted a liability set up. So we have set up a liability in the financial statements. I think it's around 7.7 million. And we used that value as the 2022 as well. And we adjusted for prior periods. And all it really means is we're setting up a liability for future amounts. It was well audited. We spent a lot of time working on that number to get a solid number for the statements, and we appreciate all Kyle's and his team's help in getting that number and allowing us to audit it. But that's what that little emphasis of matter means in the auditor's report. The auditor's report also runs through really quickly about the responsibilities of management in the town of Coaldale and our responsibilities for those financial statements. So the main thing to come through here is that we have a clean audit opinion. Okay, I'll run through the management letter next. So we come out and do our audit, and as we're doing our audit, if anything comes to our attention for the town to make their systems more efficient, effective, to strengthen internal controls, we would note it through a management letter and present that to council. I'm happy to report that we didn't note any significant deficiencies that we needed to report to the town. Okay, and then the last letter that I'm going to go through is the post-audit letter. So we gave a pre-audit letter to council and management at the beginning of the audit saying, this is what we're going to do with our audit. Here's our materiality. Here's the steps we're going to take. The post-audit letter kind of wraps that up and gives you a little conclusion as to how the audit went. So we'll go to the next page. In our communications to our audit clients, the first thing we have to do to council and board members is identify whether there's any significant deficiencies in internal controls. If there was, it would have been reported in that management letter, so I'm happy to report we didn't find any. We also have to talk a little bit about illegal acts and fraud. I know that's everybody's favorite subject, but an audit isn't designed to go in and look for illegal acts and frauds. But the way we set up an audit by looking at your internal controls and testing systems from beginning to end, we get a good idea of those internal controls. So we test a lot on the revenue expense side, payroll. We do a lot of work, and we're happy to say that we didn't come across any illegal acts and fraud during our audit. Okay. The rest, we talk a little bit about whether there was any disagreements between management and ourselves, and I'd like to say there weren't any. We discussed issues and came to similar conclusions on how to report those items. I must say the ARO really did throw a loop this year for us and for a lot of municipalities as well, just in determining how to value that. There's different ways to value it, whether we went and got external people to come in to help us with that. It was a lot of work going on there, but we had no disagreements there with management, and we also received their full cooperation. So we appreciate Kyle, Tim, and Ashley and the team for that help and assistance. Okay, so moving on down, it says no other matters were noted for this year. But we do want to bring up a little bit about upcoming, do you have the next page? Yeah, that's it. So knowing accountants, we can't ever sit still, and we have to come up with new rules and regulations, although we don't come up with them, somebody else does. But there's upcoming public sector accounting guidelines that could impact the town and their reporting for the next year. And this is something Kyle and his team and our team will work together to determine how these impact the town of Coaldale. The first one is in regards to purchased intangibles. So it's just providing a little bit more guidance on non-monetary resources that the town is acquiring. And it could be licenses or something to do with natural resources and things like that. So we'll assess that at that time. They're also giving on PS 3400, they're giving a little bit more guidance as to when to recognize revenue and when not to recognize revenue. And it deals a lot with performance obligations. So what is your obligations to earn that revenue, and are we reporting it correctly? PSAB 3160 is in regards to public-private partnerships. And so that's when the town would use private sector partners to do infrastructure, to provide support for that, to provide revenue towards that. So not sure how much these will impact the town, just looking at them. Probably not a whole lot, but we will watch out for those. And then for 2026, they're saying that there will be a lot of financial statement presentation changes. So the statements that you just looked at will look a little bit different based on how we set up the balance sheet, how we set up the income statement, what statements appear and what don't. And so those are the changes that we can look forward to upcoming and work towards those. All right. Is there any questions I can answer on those reports or anything on the audit itself?
Thank you, Nadine, and thank you, Kyle, for your very in-depth report. I'll open it up to members of council. Are there any questions for either of our presenters? Seeing none. Oh, Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mayor, and thank you to both of you for your presentation and the audit today. And I appreciate hearing the clarity to which we're at. My question is about the asset retirement obligation, and with regards to the asbestos abatement component. I know it's something that we may not have to deal with immediately, but does that become something that we are obligated to deal with once the assignment for removing that asbestos comes into play?
Yeah, there's legal obligations that, when you renovate to demolish a facility, that we do have older facilities in town, such as the arena, which, at that time you may have to look at abatement for asbestos. So under the new standards, we're required to essentially list any liability when we have an obligation to restore something to its previous condition based on a legal standard. And so asbestos being that one that some of the older buildings, they all have, a lot of them do have them, but until it reaches that point where we're required to do something about it, then that will be the time when the liability is recognized.
Thank you.
Any further questions for either of our presenters? So once again, thank you very much, Nadine, and Kyle, pass on to your team. We appreciate all the work you do on preparing these statements, and obviously you're doing a great job because you won an award again for the 5th year in a row. So congratulations. Could I get someone to make a motion that council approve the 2023 audited financial statements as presented? Councillor Chapman. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 6.1 under business arising from the minutes. We have our Manager of Government Relations, Jonathan Wensveen, presenting on the drought management in Coaldale potential long-term water conservation measures. John, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. So the purpose of this presentation is to present Council with a number of options with respect to economic and or regulatory water conservation measures aimed at reducing potable water consumption in Coaldale. Just to get started here, a little bit of background on December 20th, 2023, Minister of Environment and Protected Areas, Rebecca Schultz, sent a letter addressed to all elected municipal leaders in Alberta, in which she writes that in order to be fully prepared for a severe drought, municipal leaders throughout Alberta will need to take action. And as she explains in this letter, there's essentially two reasons why Alberta is facing this situation. One, last summer, several water basins reached critical drought conditions due to low rainfall and high temperatures. And two, the world is currently experiencing El Nino, a global phenomenon occurring for the first time in 7 years. And this is causing less snow and rain, along with higher temperatures, heightening the potential for significant drought into spring and summer 2024, particularly in our region. So in response to Minister Schultz's letter, the City of Lethbridge passed a motion during its January 23, 2024 council meeting, directing the city manager, among other things, to have city administration continue working in partnership with the province and regional partners, including us, on proactive measures to address the current water supply concerns, to examine best practices to determine constructive approaches most likely to achieve success for Lethbridge and District, and then 3, to prepare options for consideration at the April 11th, 2024 Economic and Finance Standing Policy Committee meeting on programs to incentivize water conservation, including but not limited to economic incentives, zero-scaping options for existing public places, and potential changes to design standards for new developments. And so during that, fast forward to that April 11th, 2024 meeting, the City of Lethbridge unveiled its 2024 Water Conservation Plan and Strategy, which is primarily intended to encourage or compel long-term changes in water use behavior. And so given the fact that this strategy was aimed at affecting long-term changes, the goal, according to the strategy, is by 2027 to reduce total per capita consumption by 15%, and then by 2030, reduce total per capita consumption by 20%. And you can see the different measures that they've put in place, or that they're going to be putting in place, in order to achieve these goals. Voluntary measures including identifying and fixing leaks, economic measures including adopting scaling water rates, and then regulatory measures including water conservation and design standards. During that same April 11th meeting, the city also unveiled an updated water rationing action plan. So unlike the city's water conservation plan and strategy, the city's water rationing action plan is intended to deal with an immediate water crisis by encouraging or compelling short-term changes in water use behavior. And so there's an important difference to grasp here between water conservation on the one hand and water rationing on the other, and what each is intended to accomplish. Water conservation has to do with these long-term changes in water use behavior, while water rationing has to do with short-term changes. And so given that this plan, which accompanies the conservation strategy, is intended to affect short-term changes, it involves either prohibiting or restricting certain uses of water, as well as limiting water availability in terms of volume, and if necessary, temporarily suspending water supply. And also, this plan recommends the use of residential and non-residential fines as a means of enforcement. Okay, so given that Coaldale gets its water from the city, what does all of this mean for Coaldale? Well, as per the town's water supply agreement with the city, whenever the city deems it necessary to encourage voluntary or impose compulsory restrictions on water usage within the city limits, the town, as a member of the Lethbridge Regional Water Services Commission, shall encourage the same voluntary or impose the same compulsory restrictions on water usage as imposed by the city. So essentially what this means is that the town is legally obligated to encourage, impose, and itself follow whatever rationing restrictions the city ends up implementing as per its recently updated water rationing action plan. And I just want to make clear that these rationing restrictions will apply to both the town itself and town residents, just as they're going to apply to both the city itself and city residents. And so the idea is that there's not supposed to be any daylight between what the city asks its residents to do and what the city itself does, or what the town is going to be asking town residents to do and what the town itself will be doing. So just to give you an idea of what these restrictions will look like, here's a quick summary of the various prohibited and restricted actions under each stage of the city's rationing plan. Under stage 1, which gets triggered when the Old Man Reservoir falls below 25% of its historic levels, prohibited actions include watering that results in runoff, including watering lawns, trees, shrubs, gardens, and bedding plants, washing or hosing down sidewalks, washing outdoor surfaces, and filling private in-ground or portable pools, spas, hot tubs larger than 3,000 liters. And then the restricted actions for that stage include watering lawns, trees, shrubs, and bedding plants for up to 2 hours on your designated day between 6 p.m. and 10 p.m. The city is going to be following a schedule of allowing people to water on days that they're recycling or their garbage is picked up, and that's how they're kind of pegging or deciding who can water and when. But for all of the city's regional customers, including Coaldale, it's only going to be watering on Mondays. And so that's why I've highlighted regional customers Mondays only in these various stages. We can go into that in more detail if you want to come back to it, but this is just to give you an idea of what kind of restrictions, if the city goes down that path, will also be facing. So what remains for council to consider today is the implementation of a number of long-term conservation measures that go above and beyond any of these restrictions that the city may adopt. And these would be similar to the ones put forward in the city's water conservation plan and strategy. And so provisionally speaking, these include the adoption of block rate water pricing or scaling water rates, the implementation of a rain barrel program, installing an irrigation cell in the town's decommissioned reservoirs, installing a recirculating water system at the Coaldale Spray Park, and encouraging, incentivizing, or even requiring xeriscaping for new and or existing residential and non-residential development projects and properties. So a little bit of background here before we get into the measures themselves. As of April 15th, water levels in the Old Man Reservoir near Pincher Creek remain quite low. In April, water levels should range between 60 to 80% of total capacity. But currently, water levels in the Old Man Reservoir sit at 35% of total capacity. The same is true for the St. Mary Reservoir near Spring Coulee. In April, water levels should range between 50 to 75% of total capacity, and currently they sit at around 26% of total capacity. And so you can see that due to these current conditions, the St. Mary's River Irrigation District has set the water allocation for the 2024 year at 8 inches of water per acre at the farm gate, and this is down from 13 last year. Some other relevant background information to keep in mind as we go through these measures is Coaldale's consumption per capita, or potable water consumption per capita. So potable water consumption is typically measured according to liters per person per day, otherwise known as liters per capita day. And so what this chart shows is where Coaldale stands relative to the Canadian and Albertan averages. On average, Albertans consume 330 liters per day, whether it's from drinking water, doing laundry, running the dishwasher, or watering lawns, what have you. Meanwhile, Canadians on average consume 401 liters per day. And then there's Coaldale's consumption, which is almost in line with the Alberta average at 348 liters per day. And it also seems to be trending downward, which is a good thing. But before we continue, I also want to put this water consumption per capita in perspective. This chart shows water usage by use type in the Oldman River Basin. And what it reveals is just how little water municipalities, approximately 3%, use, while most water is used to irrigate, and that's at about 83.5%. And so what this effectively means is that whatever municipalities in our region do to conserve water, whether it be through adopting longer term measures or imposing short-term restrictions this summer, it's going to have a marginal impact on conservation and drought mitigation in the region in general. When it comes to serious water conservation efforts, those are going to be undertaken primarily by irrigation districts. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean that there aren't other reasons to try and conserve potable water, aside from the reason that it's just good to avoid wasting potable water. You can also look at water conservation from a growth perspective. And so that's why I've put these tables together for you. What they show are different growth horizon scenarios at various levels of per capita water consumption, assuming Coaldale's current water allocation and historical growth rate of 2.37%. And so you can see that at 348, which is what the previous chart was showing, liters per capita day, will reach capacity in 2032, which gives us a growth horizon of about 8 years from today. Now, if you were to bump that liters per capita day down to 330, that would bump out the growth horizon by another 2 years to 2034. And if you were to get it all the way down to something like 275, we would reach capacity at 2042 with our current allocation, bumping out the growth horizon to 18 years from today. And so just to reiterate, water conservation is important, not just because it conserves a precious resource, but because it allows for more population and therefore economic growth as well. And at the same time, by extending the growth horizon, you're kind of creating a scenario in which you can kick out the timeline for investment-heavy capital projects like our potable water reservoir project that's going on today. Okay, so the question that remains is, if we wanted to lower our liters per capita day, how would we get there? Well, one conservation measure would be to adopt block rate or tiered water pricing. The common approach for pricing water and other goods and services in a market economy is uniform pricing. Each unit or cubic meter of water is priced the same, regardless of the amount consumed and the characteristics of the consumer. So this is how Coaldale, like most Alberta municipalities, currently price water. Block tiered pricing, on the other hand, is where the cost per unit increases with the amount consumed. So as consumption goes up, so too does the price. And this is how municipalities like Okotoks and Edmonton currently price water. And it also looks like this is how Lethbridge is going to begin pricing water, not in time for this summer, but likely beginning next year. This assumes that their council formally adopts the conservation strategy that their economic standing policy committee has consented to bring to council at the next council meeting. So you can see that Edmonton, from 0 to 10 cubic meters, prices water at $2.23. And then anything over 10 bumps, and going up to 35 bumps up to $2.43 per cubic meter, and then 35 and over is $3.08. Block rate pricing seems to have been quite effective for water conservation in Edmonton. According to the data from 2012 to 2022, Edmonton saw a 23.4% decrease in its total water consumption per capita. And during that same period, Edmonton's population grew by 26%. So what this effectively means is that over time, more and more people have become accustomed to using less and less potable water. And so therefore, Edmontonians have become accustomed to using water more efficiently, which has in turn allowed for more growth. Okotoks, the story in Okotoks is very similar. It was an early adopter of block rate pricing, due primarily to the fact that its population growth was becoming unsustainable. So they had a goal in 2014 to maintain community water consumption at less than 285 liters per capita per day and achieve a target of 275 or less by 2017. And by 2013, they'd already surpassed their 2017 target, bringing its consumption per capita down to 273 liters per capita day. And then meanwhile, over that same 10-year period, between 2003 and 2013, Okotoks' population grew by approximately 95%, from just over 14,000 residents in 2003 to just under 28,000 in 2013. So just to close the loop on this, you can see that what this chart shows is that Okotoks and Edmonton now have much lower water consumption per capita numbers than Lethbridge, Calgary, and Coaldale, and are still far below the Albertan and Canadian averages as well. And so the takeaway is that block tiered pricing seems to correlate with much lower per capita water consumption numbers. A second water conservation measure the town could implement is a rain barrel rebate program. Historically, the town has sold rain barrels to residents and currently has a dozen or so in stock. Pre-made barrels cost $78 and the town sells them for $40. But rather than purchasing, storing, and selling rain barrels at a discount to town residents, the town could implement a rain barrel rebate program. And this would essentially require that residents procure their own rain barrels and then apply for a rebate. And this is typically what's done in most municipalities that have some kind of rain barrel program, including Okotoks, Red Deer, and Sylvan Lake. And so the advantage of a rain barrel rebate program is that there's no cost associated with procuring, storing, or repairing rain barrels. It should be a fairly simple program to oversee from an administrative standpoint. Rebates are provided on a first come, first served basis until a designated fund is depleted each year. So assuming a rebate of 50% for a $78 barrel, a fund of $10,000 would pay for approximately 250 barrels. Just as an example. And so what are the impacts of rain barrels on water conservation? Well, according to Green Calgary, a single rain barrel can capture over 900 gallons of water per year. Based on this figure, if 100% of residential properties in Coaldale had a rain barrel, the town could capture up to 10,880 cubic meters of stormwater a year. And even if only 25% of residential properties in Coaldale had a rain barrel, the town could capture up to 2,720 cubic meters of stormwater a year. So all of this is to say that encouraging or incentivizing the use of rain barrels is arguably one of the most cost-effective and impactful ways of curbing potable water consumption, especially during the summer months when consumption increases due to outdoor watering. A third conservation measure the town could adopt is installing an irrigation cell at the town's decommissioned reservoirs, which would help reduce potable water consumption at the quads. As these charts show, the quads, by which I mean baseball and soccer fields, are by far the highest potable water user among town facilities, and this is due to potable water irrigation during the summer months. The town's current irrigation system at the quads uses a combination of potable water from the city and raw water from St. Mary's River Irrigation District. Aside from paying for potable water to irrigate these soccer fields, other negatives of the current system include a complex water pump station, raw water needs filtration screening, and a small delivery window for water from SMRID. So to eliminate potable water consumption at the quads, the town could install an irrigation cell at the old reservoirs, which are just next to the quads. And if this was installed, then what the town would be doing is using a combination of raw water and storm water to water these fields rather than potable water and raw water. So the estimated cost to install this cell is approximately $250,000, which would result in an annual cost savings of approximately $10,000 or 8,500 cubic meters in potable water. In addition to installing this irrigation cell, there's also one alternative, which would be to just go straight to raw water. I'm told that this would be a lot cheaper solution, but you would also, the trade-off would be that you don't get the expanded delivery window for water. So using storm water and raw water with the irrigation cell would allow for us to start watering earlier in the season and later into the season. But if we just use raw water, then we'd be confined to this small delivery window that St. Mary's River Irrigation District controls. Next to the quads, the Coaldale Spray Park is the second highest potable water user among town-owned operated facilities. And again, this is because insofar as the spray park is only open during the summer months, it's one of the main drivers of our increased potable water consumption from June through August into September. So a fourth water conservation measure worth considering is making the spray park or transforming it into a recirculating spray park. So currently the town operates what's called a flow-through spray park. Potable water is sprayed onto the play area and then drains into the town's stormwater system. The advantage of a flow-through systems is that they're fairly easy to operate and relatively low maintenance. It's kind of a set it and forget it type of system, but the problem is that it uses a lot of potable water. So to reduce potable water at the spray park, the town could install a water recirculating system. Recirculating systems drain used water into a surge tank. Surge tank water is then circulated through a filtration system where it is chemically balanced and chlorinated prior to reusing. Installing a recirculating system at the town's spray park would require a significant capital investment, however, of between $200,000 and $300,000. But based on data from last year, it would also save approximately 8,300 cubic meters of potable water per year. A final water conservation measure that the town could adopt is either incentivizing or even requiring xeriscaping for new and or existing residential and non-residential development projects and properties. Xeriscaping is a systematic method of promoting water conservation in landscaped areas. Examples include limiting turf areas, improving soil health, using mulches instead of sod, or planting drought-tolerant plants that don't require a lot of watering. And essentially, we can take a spectrum approach to xeriscaping. We can pursue voluntary measures, economic measures, or regulatory measures. Voluntary measures are simple things that include updating the town's landscaping guidelines with information regarding xeriscaping best practices and indicating a preference for xeriscaping to developers. It also includes educating the public about xeriscaping best practices via social media or the town's newsletter. As for economic measures, this would involve designing and implementing a xeriscaping rebate program. A program like this would offer rebates for the purchase of drought-resistant plants or rebates for pre-approved turf removal. These kinds of programs exist in a number of municipalities throughout the province, including Okotoks and Cochrane. And creating a xeriscaping program was also included in the city's water conservation plan and strategy. So it looks like they'll be moving towards one as well. Finally, there's a regulatory approach we could take. This would essentially involve reviewing and amending the town's land use bylaw to make xeriscaping the new standard for residential and or non-residential properties. If the town were directed to create a xeriscaping program, that program would work similar to a rain barrel rebate program. Rebates would be made available for homes with and without existing landscaping, and cover up to 50% of purchases, for instance, for drought-tolerant plants, artificial turf, rubber mulch, etc. Rebates would be provided on a first-come, first-served basis until a designated fund is depleted. And a program like this would obviously have the potential to reduce the amount of potable water used to irrigate lawns and plants in the summer months throughout the town. And with that, that concludes my presentation, and so I'll be happy to take questions from council.
Thank you, John. That was very well done. You explained it very well. I'll open it up to members of council for any questions for our presenter. Councillor Beekman.
Thank you, Mayor. Good presentation, by the way. One question that I'm not sure if you can answer, but I've always wondered this. Can we pull treated water from our lagoons for green space irrigation? And if not, what would it take to do so?
Thank you for the question. I'm actually going to call on one of my colleagues to see if you might have any insight on that.
Good
Harry,
evening,
just for our visitors online, if you could just introduce yourself and your role with the town, please.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Terry May. I'm the Public Works Supervisor for the town. And currently the town does actually use irrigated water from lagoons, but we send it to a farm, or we don't send it, but we irrigate on farm fields right now. But we would have no way probably to get it to downtown or around to the quads. So we do have or actually the landowner has a license to pull irrigated water from us.
So, so it's not a matter of the quality of water or anything like that. That water is good enough to irrigate with. It's a delivery thing.
It is a quality thing. We have to test it before we can release it to the farmer, but yes.
Okay. But to use it in the town, it's delivery is our obstacle then.
Well, that would be the first thing, but we would have to go through a regulatory process to get approval for irrigating in town.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions for either of our presenters? So a question I have, John and Terry, just stay there as well. So are we aiming to follow what's coming down the pipe, no pun intended, from the city of Lethbridge? Or are we looking at superseding, like you were saying, that there are going to be some presentation of options to the next council meeting? So are they kind of mirroring what we're trying to do, or are we going to mirror what they do, or are we going to supersede what they do?
Yeah, it's a good question. So if you recall early in the presentation, I tried to make this distinction between water conservation on the one hand and then water rationing on the other. So in terms of water rationing, we're legally obligated to follow whatever the city ends up adopting or implementing as per their updated water rationing action plan. They also passed a water conservation strategy with a number of things that they're going to be pursuing, including a zero-scaping rebate program, a rain barrel program, scaling water rates, and all of those measures are not compulsory for the town to also follow. And so the purpose of this presentation is essentially to provide those options to council as well, in case council does want to mirror those kinds of provisions or those measures that the city is going to be considering. But what's required of the town is only to follow the rationing or the water restrictions as per the rationing plan.
Thank you. And then based on this discussion, as per the resolution options, this is something I will come back for council during budget deliberations.
That's correct. We're not asking for any financial obligations or any commitments at this time. This information is merely for council to consider and then request for administration to put a more detailed proposal, resourcing proposal together for consideration during budget.
Thank you. Councillor Chapman has a question.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mayor, and thank you so much, John, for your very comprehensive presentation. And of course, I've read through all of it, including the material from the city. And so there is some issues, in my opinion. Obviously, municipalities recycle water as opposed to landowners who are on farmland who normally irrigate, which is not really water that's recoverable. So those are issues that we certainly can make some comparisons to. I think the other thing is economic development is an issue, and I really appreciate the fact how the city is really making assertive measures so that industry and commercial businesses aren't penalized for running their businesses, because many of them do need water for operations. So I appreciate how they're rolling it out, being that unless there's a severe restriction or severe situation, I think businesses will be comforted to know that they can continue on doing business in an affordable way. My concern is with the definition of regional, and I noticed here in the city's measures for stage 1 and some of the other stages that the city uses is regional customers would have restrictions Mondays only. So trying to identify what their definition, that definition would mean to Coaldale, being that all their regional customers would include Picture Butte and Monarch and Colehurst, I think, is in there. And so the town of Coaldale, obviously being a regional customer, would be affected. So would we be able to find out what we would be doing in terms of Mondays only, in terms of restrictions, and how that would be rolled out?
Through to council, thank you for the question. Yes, so by the Mondays only, all that's meant by that is that the very restrictions that Lethbridge residents are going to be required to follow on their garbage pickup or their recycling day, Coaldale residents will be required to follow on Mondays. So I think the restriction is, one of the restrictions was watering for up to 2 hours during the hours of 6 p.m. and 10 a.m. So a Lethbridge resident who gets their garbage picked up on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, that's when they'll get to water for 2 hours between the hours of 6 p.m. and 10 a.m. In Coaldale, it'll be on a Monday. Does that answer the question?
That's, yeah, partial answer. Thank you. That we'll get to, I think we'll, as we hear more, we'll probably have a better understanding then in terms of how that would affect Coaldale customers then. So obviously what we could do for our residents is do the same pattern of watering. For example, on garbage days, you would get those days as your watering days for 2 hours. Is that what you're sort of thinking or seeing as an example?
So I think the reason why the city in their conservation strategy singled out regional customers from city residents is because regional customers are not going to be following the same schedule as city residents. And because Coaldale, like Colehurst and Picture Butte and all of these regional customers get their water from the city gets to dictate to us when our residents are going to be allowed to water. And so that's why they said Mondays only. So that'll be for all residents in Coaldale, Picture Butte, Colehurst, and any other regional customer of the cities for potable water.
Thank you. Fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Pickering.
Thank you, Mayor Van Rijn. Through to Terry. So according to what Jonathan is saying, we'd be only allowed to water on Mondays? And would our system even handle that?
That would be correct. We'd only be able to water on Mondays. I'm not sure if we could maintain that or not. As long as we're still flowing off the main feed line from Lethbridge, we're not running off our reservoirs. We should be okay. But
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And another question for Terry. Like for the irrigation cell, like we have most of that infrastructure in, correct? Do we not? Like if we were to accept raw water from SMRD, like the pump station, like we have any way of pumping out of that right now, or is that going to be a Dustin question?
that's probably going to be a Dustin question. I know he's looked into it.
Okay. So Dustin, if just from an infrastructure point of view, what would we have to do? Like, I understand the watering schedule that John was referring to, like the fall watering wouldn't be an issue because the water stays on till October. So just the spring, I agree that we would be able to water earlier, the quads and such. So what infrastructure would we require to make this happen?
So it's kind of a two-pronged proposal in the sense that there's an operating benefit, like you said, that we could start irrigating earlier and irrigate later if we have that holding cell. Additionally, it'd be a settling pond. So from an operating perspective, we don't have to clean the filtration out as often, which is, I guess, just more man hours that are required. In terms of getting the raw water to the soccer fields, specifically the ITB soccer fields in the Northwest, it is possible from an infrastructure perspective to tie in the system. We just don't have the information right now. It requires some troubleshooting with the pump. So we've worked with our Parks Department trying to figure out how much work would be required. And hypothetically, we do think it's possible, but we would just like more time to look into that. So what was proposed is kind of the big, I guess, the big ask in terms of achieving the operating benefits as well as some contingency to upgrade the system to tie it in. But we do think if we wanted to only get water from where the St. Mary's diversion point is to the soccer fields, we could definitely do it cheaper. We just won't be able to irrigate in those April and September months, or October, I guess.
Okay, thank you. So before we close the loop on this, then I think an easy fix for this right now is to do the rain barrel. Like if it's a $10,000 ask, I'm sure that we can find $10,000 to even start that program this spring yet. And I'll open that up to whoever wants to answer that, whether that be our CAO or John or Dustin. Is that doable, that if like there's people already asking about the rain barrels, and I understand we have a dozen or so at the town shop that we can use those in the interim, but to start that rebate process, is that something we can do this spring yet?
I would have to consult with our financial services on that in terms of how to go about designing the program. Right now, this was just presented as an option that we could look into. But once I consult with financial services on how to go about implementing and overseeing something like that, then we could definitely come back to council and give you a better idea of whether we could do that quicker before council accepts something or proposes or funds something like that at budget.
Okay, thank you. And then Terry, you can just do this with a wave. There's like 20 of those rain barrels that we have now at the town shop. Okay. Okay, thank you. So one last opportunity, questions, comments, Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and sign me up for a rain barrel, please. My question would be maybe to Kaylin. with regards to the reservoirs, is there any way we can start recommissioning them sooner than later for instances such as this? Do we have the infrastructure in place that might be able to get this started?
Through the mayor to Councillor Chapman, I can provide like a high level response to your question, and I've got a lot of colleagues here that have details if we need some supplementary information. We are working on the decommissioned reservoir project through phase 2B of the Malloy Drain, which is a tri-party project with Lethbridge County and the St. Mary's River Irrigation District. And so this project is being looked at and designed as we speak. We did receive grant dollars for that back in 2017, and we're hoping to hear officially on the status of the top-up funding that we received given the cost escalations that have occurred since 2017. So that project will be undergoing construction sometime in the near future, pending completion of design and the top-up funding. And so, like, I don't know that trying to go in there ahead of time be wise, given that we're on the doorstep of breaking ground on that phase of the tri-party project. What we looked at here is how a irrigation cell, like a subcell within the decommissioned reservoirs, could work to serve our green space needs at the quads. And that if that is something that council would be interested in funding, because we're the only beneficiary of that expenditure, now would be a time to look at incorporating that type of a design feature within the broader design of the project. As Jonathan mentioned, it's not free. It's a couple $100,000 touch. It does allow us to begin watering in April as opposed to waiting for the canal water around mid-May. But that's a service level consideration that council has to make. It also will eliminate the use of the potable water. But we can also eliminate the use of the potable water, but we'd have to be okay with not being able to water until mid-May. And given Southern Alberta, spring training, it's not February. It is, as a former coach, hopefully as soon as you can in April. But the season is done usually the second or third week of June. So the trouble with our current source of non-potable water is that you're not able to irrigate green spaces until mid-May. But that's midway through baseball and soccer season. And you can appreciate, depending on the spring, that could be make for some fairly dry fields. And those 2 fields that were identified would be considered our premium turf fields. And if season starts in April, but we're not able to apply any type of water until mid-May, you can appreciate how that is a bit of a service level reduction. So that's why we were trying to explain that it's not just a conservation effort, but it's also a service level enhancement. And that's why it's so much more money than simply just converting it to the non-potable water, if that follows.
Thank you. One last opportunity. Any questions for our presenter? So seeing none, motion option is that council direct administration to prepare a detailed resourcing proposal for the consideration during its fall 2024 budget deliberations regarding the potential adoption, implementation, and installation of any of the following long-term water conservation measures. Number 1, block rate tiered water pricing. Number 2, a rain barrel rebate program. Number 3, an irrigation cell at the town decommissioned reservoirs. 4, a recirculating water system at the Coaldale Spray Park, and or voluntary economic or regulatory xeriscaping measures. Does anybody care to sponsor that? Councillor Beekman? Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Councillor Chapman?
Thank you, Mayor. I do speak in support. I just wanted to ask Mayor if are we addressing all 5 at in the same motion here, or just any of all 5? Okay.
Thank you. The motion was carried. John, thank you very much for your presentation. Moving on to agenda item 6.2, we have our Director of Infrastructure, Dustin Yanke, presenting on the Cottonwood Drive traffic calming curbs follow-up.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. Here to give a follow-up report with additional information Council requested regarding proposed traffic calming curb installation of the mid-block crossing along Cottonwood Drive between Highway 845 and 21st Street, specifically with a focus on pedestrian crossing considerations. So we're all aware pedestrian crosswalks are there to aid pedestrian safety by giving pedestrians designated crossing points. This signifies awareness for drivers, but also gives legal recognition that they must yield to the right-of-way. Most residential crossings do not have any sort of marking, and this is just simply because it's a low safety risk. But however, once pedestrian and vehicle volumes start to increase, it often requires additional measures to be considered. Some of these measures that can often be seen are pavement markings, signage, flashing lights, physical barriers, traffic signals, and even grade separation. Cost can often be thought of as the primary limitation, but I just want to say that it's also important to ensure that the application chosen is appropriate to the environment, just so that you ensure that you maximize its effectiveness and receive neighborhood support. So with that in mind, what we've proposed here with consideration of Cottonwood Drive are these traffic calming curbs, specifically to take into account the heightened safety risk due to the wide asphalt surface, coupled with the tall fence on each side of the corridor, which we feel that is promoting complacency among motorists. This complacency causes drivers to have a tendency to feel more comfortable driving at higher speeds and be unaware of their surroundings, potentially not noticing pedestrians that are trying to navigate the mid-block crossing, which connects a paved pathway on each side of the roadway. So due to this wide open feeling that drivers are welcomed with when entering Cottonwood Drive, and following discussions that we've had with residents in the area, it's recommended to proceed with installing these physical barriers to narrow the roadway, which we believe would encourage drivers to pay more attention to their surroundings and lower their speed. Due to the cost constraints of narrowing the entire road corridor, a much more feasible option are these traffic calming curbs, which essentially serve as a pinch point at the mid-block crossing. As you've seen before, attached to this report is the same concept with the curbs placed. There'd be pigmented yellow. They are movable, and they're the height of a standard curb. Each of them weigh about 1,800 pounds, so it's not cause of concern for them moving on their own or any means of that. Some of the benefits of what we've proposed here is that it will make pedestrians more visible to drivers by being able to stage closer to the driving lanes. So it's essentially bringing them more into the field of vision for drivers as they're coming down the roadway. The effective crossing distance will also be shortened, so resulting in a smaller conflict zone. So as they're staged, they're essentially within the driving lane for a smaller period of time because vehicles are forced to travel through a smaller passage. Also serves as a form of passive speed enforcement, encouraging drivers to be more aware of their surroundings and discourage aggressive driving behaviors. They will not inhibit drainage in any way and can be easily removed or adjusted. In contrast to alternative traffic calming measures such as speed bumps, this proposal does not negatively impact other road users who are already obeying the posted speed limit. So just some key considerations for council. By trialing these curbs, we also provide an opportunity to increase safety, or we provide an opportunity to increase safety at this crossing, but also provide an opportunity to potentially use these in other areas of town. Pending their effectiveness, we do plan to collect more speed data once they're installed. Working with Mark and his CPOs, we can install our traffic analyzers here and actually get measurable data to confirm how effective they are. Much more cost-effective alternative to permanent curb extensions, similar to Main Street, essentially serving the same effect, but as I said, much more cost-effective. And further, they also allow for removal should council have the desire. Just touching base on speed bumps again, they can definitely be effective in reducing speeds. However, because Cottonwood Drive is a collector road with high traffic volumes, and considering that only 19% of drivers typically exceed 50 kilometers an hour based off our collected data, we don't recommend speed bumps at this location. And lastly, I just want to say that it should be noted that this proposal isn't intended, nor is it anticipated to resolve all of the speeding issues along Cottonwood Drive, but rather it should be considered as a tool to encourage drivers to slow down and be more aware of pedestrians, specifically at the mid-block crossing, with an emphasis on improving pedestrian safety at the location. And from here, I'd like to open up to council if they have any questions.
Thank you, Dustin. I'll open it up to members of council. Any questions, comments to our presenter? So our Councillor Avery.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for the presentation, Dustin. I'm just curious, cost-wise, you know, on the highway, we've got flashing pedestrian crossings to slow traffic down. They're coming from a speed of 100 kilometers an hour to 50 kilometers an hour at the first one at 30th, and then another one at the canal, then another one at 23rd, another one at 21st, another one on 18th. What's the cost comparison for these compared to the flashing lights for pedestrian crossing? Because if we're looking at pedestrian, I think this kind of impedes a little bit of the driver with a bullard up a little bit for a little guy crossing the street. Have we looked at what the cost? Now, I'm not saying we don't need it here. I'm still not 100% convinced of this compared to how we're slowing traffic down on 845.
So thank you for the question. The rectangular rapid flashing beacons is what the technical name is for the flashing lights. Most recent installations and quotes we've got are about $20,000. So they are definitely at a higher price point. One of the considerations we had with this proposal is just given how wide the road is, that it really, when drivers are coming down Cottonwood Drive, they're really not paying attention. So we feel that even if there are flashing lights, that the road is just so wide that there would be off of the side. So it's just one extra consideration that we had, where this physical barrier forces drivers to pay attention to where they're going a bit more, and ideally slow them down.
Any further questions, comments for our presenter? Seeing none, I'll just go through the resolution options. Option 1, that council approve the request to install traffic calming curbs at the mid-block crossing along Cottonwood Drive between Highway 845 and 21st Street intersections as a means of enhancing pedestrian safety in the area. That's option 1. Option 2, that council table the request pending the receipt of additional information. And option 3, that council decline the traffic calming curbs. Does anybody care to sponsor one of those 3 options? Deputy Mayor Saylor.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to sponsor option 1.
Thank you. There's a motion on the floor for option 1. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you, Dustin. Moving on to agenda item 7.1, bylaws and policies. We have our Director of Protective Services, Clayton Rutberg, presenting. And is Mark Anderson going to be joining you up there today? Or okay, thank you. So Clayton's going to be presenting on Emergency Services Bylaw 888-R-04-24 regarding second and third reading. Clayton, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. just bringing back our bylaw that was brought forth by Deputy Chief Fraser at the last council meeting for first reading. With some of the amendments and suggestions that had come back from council after that reading to improve the bylaw and alter it a little bit to include more of a broader term with emergency services to allow us to capture some of the other services that we deliver as an emergency services department, as well as just refining some of the definitions to make sure that they captured the various positions within the department. So presenting to you today the emergency services bylaw for second and third reading.
Any questions for our presenter? Seeing none, could I get someone to entertain sponsoring second reading of the Emergency Services Bylaw 888-R-04-24? Councillor Reese makes that motion. Any further questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. And I'm looking for someone to sponsor third and final reading of Emergency Services Bylaw 888-R-04-24. Councillor Pickering. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you, Clayton. Good job in putting all that together. Moving on to agenda item 7.2. Business License Bylaw Amendment 877-R-04-24 regarding first reading. And we have our Manager of Community Policing, Mark Anderson, presenting. Mark, welcome. And you're good to go whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. I'm here to speak about our current business license bylaw and some proposed amendments to that bylaw. We want to update the current bylaw to bring it in line with current provincial regulations to better identify growing business sectors within our community and to encourage compliance. I'm also seeking to repeal the current taxi bylaw that has not been revisited since 2005 and to incorporate taxi information and ride service information into our current business bylaw so that we are able to address those business sectors and to attract them to Coaldale. The current business license bylaw was approved by council November 22nd in 2021, and the current taxi bylaw was actually December 12th, 2005. As Coaldale grows, it's attracting a variety of businesses which our current business license bylaw does not address. The proposed updates to the bylaw and the rescinding of the taxi bylaw will streamline licensing, provide better definitions and descriptions, and foster a better business environment in Coaldale. Our current taxi bylaw, for example, is outdated and not in line with provincial regulations regarding transportation network businesses, or as a lot of people call them, Ubers or rideshare businesses. It also is no longer in line with other municipalities who have taken out many of the restrictions in their taxi bylaws, including the ongoing testing of meters and the directing of what companies can and cannot charge for the provision of service. We don't have any current taxi businesses here in Coaldale except for one that I'm aware of. And as we grow, attracting more service to the community can only enhance our town's enjoyment and service to our citizens. The second area that we're looking at was food trucks, and we attract more and more food trucks all the time. The problem for us from an enforcement perspective is most of the food trucks, because it's so expensive to have an out-of-town business license here, they'll choose to go for a day license, which means repeated visits by our enforcement services to make sure that they have food licenses for every event that they're here or every day that they're here. We'd like, with the changes in our bylaw, to encourage them to make use of better terms for food trucks so that we can attract more to the community, provide more variety for our community, and also to increase compliance with business licensing. The suggested changes would then make food trucks a specific category within our business license bylaw. Farmers markets and markets, we have not addressed those before, and it becomes apparent now that we're seeing more local markets in town that we need to make it attractive for people to participate in those markets. I look at Summerfest as being one great example, where under our current rules, every person who has a stall in a market requires a business license for the town. Again, it becomes an enforcement issue for our municipal enforcement people, but it also makes it quite onerous on the market people who are organizing them. And by making changes to our business license bylaw, we can actually encourage that type of community event, make the process easier to navigate for people who want to participate in them, and just make it better, more enjoyable for the citizens of our town. Key considerations in the taxi amendment are particularly because the transportation network services were never addressed in our taxi bylaw, and in fact in 2005 ride sharing services were just really in the fledgling business. They were just starting out. Since that time, the province has actually stepped in and written a number of legislative requirements for ride sharing businesses, which should be included in our local bylaws. Although the province has made rules, they've directed it back to the municipalities to incorporate them into their own licensing regulations. So in other municipalities, taxi industries are no longer directed at what fares they can charge or how meters are certified. Once they're installed, they're only required to make sure that they do work. In Coaldale, we've always relied, if a taxi was coming out from Lethbridge, that they've done something in Lethbridge. Lethbridge has now removed all of those restrictions from their own taxi license bylaw, and now it's up to the owner operator to make sure that everything is compliant. Currently, with our current taxi license bylaw, each taxi driver would be required to have an out-of-town business license at a cost of $400 annually. And we see from that we don't have very many people coming out here. We only have one taxi business that comes out. The changes that we're proposing would be to make it much easier for a taxi company to do business in Coaldale and to encourage more drivers to come out here, providing better service for the community. For our food trucks, our current business license bylaw treats food trucks the same as any other business. So primarily most of them are coming in from out of town. So it's quite expensive for them to come here and to provide a food truck business. Consequently, a lot of them will try to operate without licenses, and it has a ripple effect because there's also health regulations and fire regulations that food trucks are supposed to adhere to. And if we can make it attractive for them to come here, obtain a license, we can also make sure that they have their fire inspections and that they're ready to go and that it's providing a good, safe service here in town. As part of this, right now we don't have any direction for food trucks on where they can go, where they can park, how they can operate. At a later date, once this has gone through council and providing and establishing, or addressing any concerns you might have, I would be coming back with some parking regulation changes to our traffic bylaw so that we would include those as well, so that we can actually provide food trucks with proper direction before they come here, and we can make it enjoyable for them to do business with us. For key considerations for farmers markets is that we really don't have any definition of what a market is here. The only market definition right now is a Alberta approved farmers market, and under the provincial regulations they don't require a business license if it's an Alberta approved farmers market, but it also limits what you can sell or what you can offer at a farmers market. By bringing in a market to our bylaw, we can encourage more things like we do at Summerfest and other festivals here to encourage local people, local entrepreneurs to get out and display their wares and interact with the town's citizens. Financial impact, if we can attract more business to Coaldale and increase compliance, it means less time for our enforcement side of things, our enforcement people to be spent out there doing that. It will attract more compliance, will attract more fees for licensing, and also just improve the community itself. As far as the proposed fees for licensees for these different businesses, I would be returning at another council presentation with Kyle Beauchamp to present rates and fees bylaw amendment, and we would put in there. The proposed fees are included with the staff report, just for your information on what we would be suggesting later at a different meeting. When we have made the changes to the business license bylaw, we would be doing an education campaign with food trucks, with markets, with the people who would be impacted, taxi businesses, to let them know that we've changed the rules and we've relaxed them so that we can encourage them to come out here and do business with us. Social media campaign is planned, and also within emergency services, in order to gain that fire inspection compliance, we were going to work with community services to organize a food truck festival and invite as many of the food trucks locally and from the surrounding areas to come out so that we can actually meet with them, explain the licensing bylaws, and also perform their fire inspections on their vehicles for them so that they're ready to go. With that, I'll open for any questions that council might have.
Thank you, Mark. So quick question, you were saying, or did I misunderstand you, for the parking of the food trucks? Are you, if we pass first reading tonight, are you coming back with further amendments or not on this particular bylaw?
Not on this particular bylaw, thank you. That would be required under the traffic safety bylaw.
So there's nothing stopping us from passing all three readings tonight then?
There is not.
Okay, thank you. I'll open up to members of council for any questions for our presenter, Councillor Beekman.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mark. Two questions here. Was there an incident or something that had come up to cause this 2005 bylaw to come up for review again, or just?
Yeah, thank you for the question. If you're referring to the taxi bylaw?
Yeah.
No, there was no incident that came up that brought that up. It was as a part of reviewing the current business license bylaw, the taxi bylaw was brought out to my attention, and we reviewed it, and we could see where it was inconsistent with the current provincial regulations.
Okay. Now, as for the food trucks and farmers markets, just curious to know, you'd know better than me, are the proposed rates in terms of dollars and term time, they're competitive with like Lethbridge, Tabor, that kind of?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions, comments for our presenter? Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mark, for bringing this all forward. I appreciate learning some more again, and particularly with the taxi bylaw. I appreciate the fact that you want to ensure that the taxis industry is up to date on their standards and that they're complying with provincial regulations as needed. However, could you just restate with council the situation with the city, and am I hearing that they are kind of relieving themselves of having to follow any or apply any regulations, or what's the situation there?
Thank you for the question. The city of Lethbridge repealed sections of their taxi bylaw late last year, and they took out the repeated need to have the meters checked in the vehicles, and they removed there was a number of provisions similar to ours about directing how much a taxi could charge for pickup and delivery, for discount rates for seniors and things like that. So they took all of that out to make it, I shouldn't speak to their reasons. It appears that it makes it more consistent with what the rideshare businesses and how they operate and how they price.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to get into a debate over this, because at first, when I was reading through this, I was almost tempted to suggest that we not include a taxi bylaw, mainly because of the following it, or policing it is the word. I'm looking for. And how would you police somebody coming in at midnight or 2 a.m. with a passenger from another jurisdiction, or picking somebody up early in the morning to go to work? So I'm just curious as how we could apply that, but at the same time, I appreciate where you're coming from with the rest of the regulations and that. So I don't know if we need to break that up, or if we need to ensure with the whole bylaw that we have something that is measurable. But I guess for myself, how do we apply the business license component to particularly to the taxi industry?
Thank you for the question. Applying it to the taxi industry for us would be an information sharing process where we're going to approach the taxi services that are coming out here, or have the potential to come out here, and say, here's our rules and regulations. We want to encourage you to come out here, and we want to make this an attractive environment for you to provide service.
So do you actually send that information out to all the taxi companies in the area, from Tabor to Lethbridge and everywhere else?
Certainly the ones that are local, yes, we would.
Right. And you feel that the application of the business license and the operator side, of $100 for the business and then $10 for the operator, is that ideal?
I believe it is, yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Any further questions, comments? So, Councillor Reese? So we have some options available. We can pass first reading. And if there's not any questions coming out of this, if we want, we could go for all 3 readings tonight. Councillor Reese?
Thank you, Mayor Van Rijn. I'll make a motion to approve the first reading of Business Bylaw 877R-04-24.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Is there any care to make a motion for second reading? Councillor Pickering makes that motion. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Now I need a motion for unanimous consent. Councillor Avery does that. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And finally, third reading. Who wants to sponsor that one? Councillor Beekman. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Yes, sorry, go ahead.
In our decision options above what we just voted on, the option number 1 to repeal the taxi bylaw, do we need to make that a separate motion as well?
The last line in the bylaw actually includes the repeal of the taxi bylaw as part of the business license bylaw. It just seemed the best way to write it that way so that it was all encompassing for years to come.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Chapman.
My apologies, Mayor. I did forget to ask a question of Mark with regarding to reciprocal business licenses, if that's included, or is that something that you still pursue?
We no longer do reciprocal licenses.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Moving on to agenda item 7.3, Land Use Bylaw Rezoning Amendment 889-P-04-24. Regarding first reading, we have our Director of Growth and Investment and Deputy CAO, Cameron Mills, presenting. Cam, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mayor Van Rijn. Before I jump into item 7.3, if it's deemed appropriate, I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about an event that happened here in Coaldale, just to provide council with some information, if that's acceptable. Great. So, as many of you might know, I spend a bunch of my free time volunteering in youth sports organizations, and I'm happy to report that this weekend I spent some time volunteering as part of the Prairie Baseball Academy's aptly named Icebreaker Baseball Tournament, which took place this weekend in Lethbridge and also out here in Coaldale. And so I wanted council to be aware that this weekend we had the 15-year-old and 13-year-old baseball teams out here in Coaldale. That was 26 teams, which represents 330 families, or approximately 1,000 people, playing multiple games out here at our facilities. And I wanted to let you know that I received not less than 20 unique compliments from various families from around the region just on the state and quality of our facilities out there at the quads. So we were using Diamond 7 and 4 for those facilities, and I was receiving text messages. I was having people come up to me. These are teams from Alberta, all over Alberta, Edmonton, Red Deer, Okotoks, you name it. People were very, very impressed with the quality of those facilities. So I wanted to personally say I appreciate council devoting resources to those facilities and making sure that we have those in place. And I also wanted to take an opportunity publicly to really commend the staff that have put a lot of work into bringing those facilities up, Matt and Cam and the team that do the work out there. The pride they take in their work is visible, and people are noticing, and we're hearing it, and I just wanted to ensure that word was spread along. So thank you.
Thank you. And on behalf of council, I ask our CAO to pass that on to our team members. Thank you very much for bringing that up, Cam.
Absolutely.
So whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So what we have here today is Land Use Rezoning Amendment Bylaw 889-P-04-24, and we're presenting this to council for first reading. So the town is in receipt of an application to rezone lands legally described as a portion of northeast of 4, 9, 20, west of 4 from urban reserve to direct control. So the land in question, the lands are located in southwest Coaldale along the southern boundary of Coaldale and serve as the existing location for the Elk Creek Dairy Farms dairy operation. With the current zoning in place, there's no opportunity for that operation to expand or improve its existing dairy operation. The landowner is interested in potentially pursuing a rezoning in order to modernize the operation while also adding a tourism and education element by way of the establishment of an eco-dairy. And in order to do so, administration has been looking at the various steps that would be required, and there is a bit of a difficult regulatory element here with respect to the Natural Resource Conservation Board and rules associated with these types of operations. And we believe the first step in a multi-step process before a final decision is made here is to seek rezoning from its existing urban reserve designation to direct control. As council will recall, what direct control means is that in order for a development permit to be issued, which would absolutely be required in order to achieve what the landowner is attempting to achieve, that would need to be brought forward to council rather than to administration or the Municipal Planning Commission, and it would be council's consideration, and also ultimately council would issue or choose not to issue a permit in that regard. And so step one of this process from our perspective is to consider that direct control redesignation. Now, this is obviously a very unique proposal. So we don't expect eco dairies to pop up all over town. This is really functionally limited really to this site. And for that reason, direct control is really the most appropriate way of dealing with this sort of thing. And the other thing when we were looking at this is typically when we would do a rezoning application, we would pass first reading, and then given that we have 3 weeks of available time between meetings, typically we would come back next meeting with a public hearing and second and third reading. Because of the unique nature of this particular request, we think it's perhaps more appropriate to spend a little bit more time providing for some public input. So our recommendation does not include asking council to set a specific time and date for a public hearing. We're going to take a look at that. Likely what I'm going to suggest is that the public hearing will likely take place either towards the end of May or early June, once we've had an appropriate time to sort of explain the nature of the proposal to the community and gather feedback as required. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions council has at this time.
Thank you, Cameron. I'll open it up to members of council for any questions, comments. Seeing none, could I get someone to entertain a motion that council provide first reading of Land Use Bylaw Rezoning Amendment 889-P-04-24 as presented? Deputy Mayor Saylor makes that motion. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you, Cameron. Moving on to council and committee reports, we have Councillor Beekman will be giving a verbal update on the Coaldale Public Library. Jason, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Council. If anybody has any questions, you can feel free to stop me in the middle, but I'll try to wrap this up in a couple minutes and can take your questions after. So first and foremost, I do want to point out and give a shout out to the new head librarian, Kendra Burse. She has, as you guys know, she took over the role in the middle of December, and it has been I guess, a seamless transition. She has been just absolutely killing it from all accounts, doing a wonderful job. So hats off to Kendra on doing the job she's doing. Follow up on our plan of service updates in our section of Learn to Read and Write. A couple new programs here. Adulting 101, it's a new program we've developed, or that the library has developed, and it's a partnership with Kate Andrews High School, where representatives from the library go into the high school to offer helpful life skills to students transitioning to graduation and post-secondary, budgeting, applying for scholarships, renting, choosing roommates, meal planning, prep, and more. All stuff that I definitely could have benefited from when I was 18 or 19 years old. Teen Zone is another program that they've started doing, Friday afternoon program. Each month it's a different theme, and it's just encouraging teens to participate and hang out and socialize and try new things. That's another program that they're working with Kate Andrews to promote. Game Night After Dark, that was a program that was offered over Easter break. That was another focus on preteens and teens. The registration cap for that program was set at 12, and it filled up right quick. If anybody's familiar with the game Dungeons and Dragons, well, it has made an explosive comeback, so the library is offering sessions on learning how to play it. As for resources and supports for our homeschooling students in Coaldale, the library is offering STEM programs for homeschooled students. Now that's your science, technology, engineering, and mechanics. Those are programs that are now offered in public schools, so the library is offering that to our homeschooled students. As well as there is the homeschool science exhibition taking place June the 12th. In our diversity and cultural awareness section. Our Culture Bites program is still going on. That's every quarter where members of the community share about their culture and their food. Another program is called Spice It Up, and that's a new program where that includes a take-home spice pack, and with it comes a history of the spice, cultures it's used in, food pairings, and cultural recipes. To round that out, the family and accessible restroom that is being completed this month. If you're not aware of it, it's a large single-stall bathroom, can be accessed by all genders with a baby change table, wheelchair accessible sink and towel dispenser, and hands-free door opener. It looks great, and they're quite happy with it. For any upcoming events coming up for the library, the Spring Craft Fair is May the 11th. We've got 2 art shows happening at the McCain Gallery. The Baker Spring Art Gala opening night, May the 7th. St. Joe's Art Show is June the 3rd, or that's the opening night for that. The Town of Coaldale Big Truck Petting Zoo on June the 8th. The library will be providing an activities tent for that event, as well as Summerfest. They'll be doing sparkle tattoos, book sale, teen video game tournament, Lego building, door prizes, and a silent auction, as well as the summer reading programs are a go. Now, I've been asked a couple times about the skate lending library, so just kind of an update on that. The library did receive a grant for the skates, but a call was put out for skate donations to the community to increase the stock, and we have received about 10 pairs so far. Nice part about the donations, it allows the grant money to be stretched a little further, and one thing nobody anticipated is skate sharpening. It's one of those unforeseen and unfactored operating costs. I know for myself, when I got my skates sharpened, it's usually about $10 a time. So this is a really good opportunity to bring down the operating, I guess, the operating costs and owning costs of those skates. If there's any questions about how the skates will be lent out, they'll be lent out like any other item in the library and not just limited to use at the outdoor space at the Civic Square. It's a 7-day lend out period like anything from the toy library or a book or a DVD or anything like that. And that concludes my report if there's any questions.
Thank you, Councillor Beekman. Any questions for Jason? Well done on your presentation.
Well done. I'll also give credit to Kendra on that, as she helped me a lot with that as well. So
Perfect. Could I get someone to, or I guess you can do that yourself, receive the Coaldale Public Library update as information? Councillor Beekman, want to do that? Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to information items. We have the minutes from the Gem of the West Museum from their March 6th meeting. Any questions, comments on that? Seeing none, could I get someone to make a motion that we receive Gem of the West meeting minutes from March 6, 2024 as information? Councillor Pickering. Thank you. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Moving on to 12.2, the Southern Regional Stormwater Drainage Committee meeting minutes from August 23rd. Are there any questions or comments regarding those minutes? Seeing none, could I get someone to make a motion that council receive the Southern Regional Stormwater Drainage Committee meeting minutes from August 23rd, 2023 as information? Councillor Pickering. Any discussion? All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. And finally, we have under agenda item 12.3, the Barons Eureka Warner Family and Community Support Services meeting minutes from March 6. Are there any questions, comments regarding those minutes? Seeing none, could I get someone to make a motion that council receive the Barons Eureka Warner Family Community Support Service meeting minutes from March 6, 2024 as information? Councillor Chapman. Any discussion? All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. So that concludes the open portion of our meeting. I will require a motion that council move into closed session at 6:56 p.m. in accordance with section 197-4-B of the Municipal Government Act to discuss matters exempt from disclosure for items 13.1, 13.2, and 13.4, subject to section 16, business interests of a third party. Items 13.2 and 13.4, subject to section 25, economic and other interests of a public body. Item 13.3, subject to section 19, evaluations. And item 13.4, subject to section 17, personal privacy. Who would care to make that motion? Councillor Reese. Any discussion? All those in favor? Carried unanimously. We're going to take a 10-minute